Despite the vital concerns at the conference today, not everybody in Ottawa was considering the Constitution. Some people were looking at a car, but not just any car. The alternative to the gas guzzlers made it to Parliament Hill through its proponents, a group called the Canadian Alternate Energy Corporation. A curious energy minister, Mark Lalonde, showed up for a once-over. So did Governor General Edward Schreier. The car is powered by a formidable mixture of hydrogen and ammonia. I'm Harvey Kirk for Lloyd Robertson and for CTV News.
This is the CTV television network.
Hydrofuel ammonia has received an enthusiastic reception from government representatives in Ottawa and Toronto. The car was recently demonstrated in North Bay. The car was in Ottawa this week, and a couple of interested observers were Governor General Edward Schreier and Energy Minister Mark Lalonde. After a ride around the Parliament block, Lalonde expressed satisfaction with the performance of the car and the fuel.
There's no doubt about it. The acceleration is good, and you don't see the difference, frankly, from a car that is gasoline fueled. Seems quite good, and it's maybe a little bit slower on acceleration, I'm told, but you don't notice the difference, frankly. It would be good for racers would know the difference, I suppose, but quite interesting, and certainly so far as they will be able to produce it on a competitive basis with oil, that's the type of thing we want to encourage and support. So I think my department is working closely with them, and I hope we'll see projects of this nature really taking off the ground. Thank you. Thank you.
Petro-Canada could look at it for the consumers. I'm sorry, I'd certainly like to get into something with Enertech because they're suited directly.
Are you in the West?
No, we've moved our facilities now to Toronto for a number of reasons.
Where did you start in Winnipeg?
Unity, Saskatchewan.
In Saskatchewan.
In Saskatchewan.
But anyway, we all started. Yeah. Did you come from Saskatchewan?
Father Murray, already in the
There you go.
But we...
well, you're in touch with Enertech,
yes.
I'm sure. Also.
Well, we haven't actually gone to anybody but Mr. Taylor's branch, Renewables, first, because they were most suited to what we were doing.
Sure.
And we felt we'd go to them first, and we expected that they'd come to our assistance, and then we could go on.
Good. Well, talk to Enertech.
Yes, I will.
Lauren Dyke over there is a first-rate guy. And,
all right. His Excellency, as a matter of fact, mentioned yesterday that I should call Mr. Dyke, so I will do that.
By all means.
Great. It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good luck to you, fellas.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
A car powered by anhydrous ammonia has received an enthusiastic reception from government representatives in Ottawa and Toronto. The car was recently demonstrated in North Bay. The car was in Ottawa this week, and a couple of interested observers were Governor General Edward Schreier and Energy Minister Mark Lalonde. After a ride around the Parliament block, Lalonde expressed satisfaction with the performance of the car and the fuel.
There's no doubt about it. The acceleration is good, and you don't see the difference, frankly, from a car that is gasoline fueled. Seems quite good, and it's maybe a little bit slower on acceleration, I'm told, but you don't notice the difference, frankly. It would be good for racers would know the difference, I suppose, but quite interesting, and certainly so far as they will be able to produce it on a competitive basis with oil, that's the type of thing we want to encourage and support.
Yesterday, Nipissing MPP Mike Harris invited fellow MPPs and members of the media to test drive the car at Queen's Park. Harris tried it and said he was impressed with the car and the future of alternate fuel in Ontario.
But what's exciting for Ontario is that this fuel is manufactured from electricity. That's the main cost item, and of course it's not tied to oil or propane or any of the petroleum-based products. So I think it's an exciting project for Ontario. I think it's also can be an exciting project. I think there can be spin-off for our area. The Greg Vesna, who is a former North Bayite and from here and has a great love for North Bay and the Nipissing district, would like to see some of the action here in our area. And Greg and I have met with Mayor Jack Smiley on a couple of occasions, and I've met with Greg on a couple of occasions. And I'm hopeful that if the project proceeds and if it proves to be viable, that we can indeed attract some of the industry and the technology that will be involved here to North Bay.
At present, a report is being readied by officials in North Bay concerning the possible conversion of some city vehicles to burn hydrofuel. That's Friday's news. Drew Wilson's up next with the sports.
The ammonia-powered car looks and operates like any other car, but under the hood are a few extra gadgets.
What happens is the fuel comes up from the storage tank in the back here to these lock-off valves. It's at about 150 psi right now. Over here to the vaporizer regulators where it's vaporized, and into these lines here where it's at less than 1 psi, where it's burned here and mixed in the carburetors. As you can see, there's plenty of power there.
This car is a prototype developed by the Canadian Alternative Energy Corporation, headquartered in Unity, Saskatchewan. Its tank in the trunk will propel the car for 150 to 200 miles, but it will go even further when it goes into production. The company's chairman says he's simply recycling an idea that first surfaced 40 years ago.
What happened during the Second World War, during the German occupation of Belgium, they gave them 30 days notice that their diesel supplies were going to be cut off, and they in fact ran their vehicles, their buses, on ammonia over there. So it's not new, it's just new over here. And once you get past, you know, the fact that this is something now for something completely different, generally people get excited about it and they want to know more.
Ammonia conversions aren't economically feasible for the average Calgarian yet. Ammonia prices are running comparable to gasoline prices, and there isn't an ammonia station on every street corner. But by 1986, when gasoline prices are closing in on $4 a gallon, ammonia will look pretty good selling at $1.80. The company is aiming its sales at fleets and other big gasoline users for the time being, until ammonia becomes more widely available to the general public. This is Gary Bridgewater reporting.
This 1981 station wagon is one of the latest entries into the alternative fuels sweepstakes. It runs on anhydrous ammonia spiked with additives. Without the additives, it's crop fertilizer. This is a test vehicle for a California firm's fuel production process that uses electricity produced by these parabolic collectors feeding into specially developed solar cells. Mechanical changes to the car include pressurized fuel tanks, a different carburetor, different spark plugs, and a few feet of plumbing. The most distinctive feature of this setup is the sharp odor of ammonia. Greg Vesna holds the Canadian rights to high fuel, as it's called. He claims the fuel would be cheaper to use than gasoline or diesel fuel and available from constantly renewable sources, water and sunlight. He says it could be available for sale within a year given the right market conditions, but he says there are several reasons the market conditions are not right at this time.
Oil companies, utilities companies, provincial utilities companies, nuclear industry, et cetera, once you bring online something like this, the more this comes online, the less you need the alternatives, because you start using sunlight, when you develop it, that's the most abundant resource there is. You don't have to build huge nuclear plants anymore. You don't have to use oil or non-renewables.
In a brief test drive for which no scientific accuracy is claimed, I could not detect any difference in performance from conventionally fueled vehicles. But it may be sometime after the year 2000 before I can buy the fuel. Vesna says that high fuel won't come onto the market until then, unless the public pressures politicians and industry to have it made available earlier. Del Archer, CTV News, Winnipeg.
In private automobiles, hydrogen fuel cars are at least 20 years away and probably 30.
Dr. David Scott runs the University of Toronto's Hydrogen Institute, where they're looking at better ways to use hydrogen, not by building lots of little hydrogen stations. Scott wants to build one big one to get a much bigger bang out of the fossil fuels that we have left. Specifically, the Alberta tar sands, trillions of tons of energy locked up in sticky sand. This is a hydrocarbon, but with too much carbon and not enough hydrogen. It takes endless refining to get rid of all that carbon and make a liquid fuel.
What we do now is we dig up this much fossil fuels with the tar sands, let's say, and you, one way or another, throw out carbon until you have the right hydrogen-carbon ratio. Much better, economically, environmentally, and everything else, to dig out this much fossil fuel and add hydrogen from falling water or nuclear reactors or whatever and make this much gasoline. Do you see what I mean? Now, the impact of that is quite astounding. We can literally get between 2 to 4 times as much product from a given barrel of whatever it is that we dig out of the ground if we add non-fossil hydrogen to that.
Scott's idea is to make the hydrogen by splitting water with electricity in giant electrolyzers like these, which could run on surplus or off-peak electricity from a nuclear plant. The slumping nuclear industry, of course, loves the idea. And so do the people who make the electrolyzers at this booming Toronto company, which is already a world leader in its field.
We're doing business in 86 countries at the present time.
Sandy Stewart of Electrolyzer Limited exports his units all over the world. He's convinced that hydrogen would be better used upgrading the tar sands than trying to run cars.
As general transportation, it certainly won't occur until the other resources have diminished. But I think we can see indirect uses of hydrogen in the making of the fuels, the conventional source of fuels that fit into the system as it is today.
For the politicians, though, all this futuristic hydrogen talk has been merely interesting. Marc Lalonde has driven around in Greg Vezina's car and said he liked it, but that was a year ago when Lalonde was in charge of energy, not finance. Today, there is still no federal support for the car or the tar sand scheme. For the politicians, the hydrogen future all seems very far away. But it's getting closer. There's going to be a big meeting in Edmonton next March to take a serious look at this hydrogen plan for the tar sands. The theory is that if you can get the troubled nuclear industry together with the troubled tar sands industry and all the hydrogen buffs, and then they start making oil and a lot of jobs, that could get the politicians' attention. Terry Milewski, CBC News, Toronto.
Lack of government support says he will sell his firm's technology to a foreign country. Greg Vezina complains the government is too short-sighted when it comes to new energy alternatives.
Vezina's company is Canadian Alternative Energy Corporation. It supplies technology for running vehicles on ammonia, or hydrofuel as he calls it. In fact, the city of North Bay had agreed to convert 3 of their vehicles as an experiment. Vezina says the technology will still improve, but Canada won't be a forerunner.
Well, the technology is there. You know, we have developed the technology. We do have design agreements with some major manufacturers. This project will not go ahead at this time in Canada, but it will go ahead in a foreign market.
Vezina's plan was to use the plentiful hydropower in the province to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen and use nitrogen from the air to produce ammonia. It can be done now, but further research was needed to make it more economically acceptable. Vezina says while the former North Bay City Council and Nipissing MPP Mike Harris were supportive, the government was not. This is Jeff Turrell reporting.
North Focus. Our guest is Greg Vezina, and Greg, of course, is no stranger to North Bay, no stranger to television, but a lot of things have been happening in Greg's life that we should kind of catch up on, so to speak. Greg is chairman of the Canadian Alternative Energy Corporation. How'd I do? Got it?
Did I get it right, Bob? You got her.
And a lot of things have been happening to you. When you first started off, hydrofuel was the big deal. Maybe it still is in other parts of the world, but here, it was going great guns. You went on a cross-country tour to promote the product, and then what happened? Then you went to the government for some help, and just give us a little rundown on help us catch up.
We started in July of 1980. We got into this thing and in a pretty big way, and spent about a year getting our 1981 Chevy Impala running and rolling and on the road, and getting the hydrogen tanker built and ready, and doing a very thorough business plan to prove to ourselves and to the bankers, of course, that this would work from an economic point of view. One of the biggest problems in a business venture such as this is you can speculate all you want as to the economics of what you're trying to do, but you never know until you do a business plan. And one of the problems with a business plan is you have to hire all of the three-piece suit accountants to crunch the numbers, as they say in the trade. And when you're finished with the business plan, the only thing that matters is what they call a P&L, a profit and loss.
Right.
And if it's like a pyramid, you build it up and out at the bottom drops the P&L. And if the P&L says you're going to make 27 or 30%, you've got a business. And if the P&L drops out and says you're going to make 7%, then you throw it in the garbage can and
get some more accountants with some better figures, right?
Phone your counselor. So what we did was we did the business plan, and the P&L said that the net pre-tax was going to be between 27 and 36%. That means you can make money, which means you've got a business. So we got ready to do the Trans-Canada Drive, to drive from Edmonton to Ottawa to prove that this car actually runs on this stuff.
Okay, now along the way, you did a selling job too, right?
Yeah, we stopped, of course, in every major city across Canada, and the drive was covered by all the media. The biggest problem was that it was Constitution Week. We rescheduled 3 times for 3 separate weeks, and every week the Prime Minister decided that they might settle or they might not settle a Constitution, so it was so difficult to plan. And if we had waited 2 more weeks, then the situation in Afghanistan happened, and Poland, and so you can never plan for the media. So we got to Ottawa. We stopped at North Bay here, of course, and had the tanker and car on display at Northgate. And we got to Ottawa, and Lalonde was there. Lalonde and Governor General Schreier and about 50 MPs. And he took the car for a test drive, and we do have a news clip, some news clips coming up of that, and said how it was assuming that we could make it on a competitive basis with oil, that it was the kind of thing that he was going to encourage and support. He didn't bother with any of the specific qualifying factors, such as we give 92 cents out of every dollar that's spent in the frontier to the oil companies from the taxpayers, and if we do that for you, you can make your fuel at 16 cents a gallon. There was no discussion of that, you know, but on a straight line economic basis, the thing worked.
Okay, how did, first of all, I'm just curious of when you landed in Ottawa, how did you go about getting all of a sudden the Governor General to drive your car, or Lalonde, or whoever? How did you go about, just fill me in on that little bit.
To make a long story short, I was a guest speaker at the Second Cities Energy Conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba in January of '81. I was there with Dr. David Scott from the University of Toronto and His Excellency Governor General Edward Schreier. Now, the Governor General is an alternative fuels advocate, enthusiast indeed. And he made his speech at the big dinner, and I got right up on the stage in front of Schreier and David Scott. And I made sure that I had Scott standing there, and I said, "Your Excellency, I'm Greg Vesna, and I have a hydrogen car out front." And he'd heard of me, and with David Scott standing there, he said, "David, does this thing actually work?" And Scott was on the spot because it did work, and he couldn't argue, and he said, "Yes, it will." So the Governor General asked us a couple of questions, economic questions, which I answered. And when we got to Ottawa, we phoned him, and we said, you know, here we are, and it's Constitution Day, and we've driven, 3,000 miles, and it's the busiest news day in 116 years. What can you do for us? And he said, well, come on out to Rideau Hall, and we'll talk about it. And we got to Rideau Hall, and he cleared his schedule for the next afternoon, and had his press people call a press conference. And a new Democratic MP got us a permit to put everything right on the hill. And it was Schreier that got everybody to show up in the first place, which we really appreciated. Without his support, we never even would have got that far, yet got as far as we have since.
Okay. Now, do we have a clip coming up now? What are we going to see?
The first clip is the CTV National News Constitution Day.
Oh, yeah.
Bruce Phillips said, when I went to see him, he said, you couldn't have picked a better news day. I said, I said, look, it might have been the busiest news day in 116 years, but it'll be another 116 years before I can get Schreier and Lalonde together in front of the car. So he said, all right, we'll run something. We'll give you 5 seconds, but we'll run something. And he gave us 15 seconds. So that's the first clip.
We're going to see 15 seconds?
15 seconds on CTV.
Okay, here we go. Let's have a look at it.
Despite the vital concerns at the conference today, not everybody in Ottawa was considering the Constitution. Some people were looking at a car, but not just any car. The alternative to the gas guzzlers made it to Parliament Hill through its proponents, a group called the Canadian Alternate Energy Corporation. A curious energy minister, Mark Lalonde, showed up for a once-over. So did Governor General Edward Schreier. The car is powered by a formidable mixture of hydrogen and ammonia. I'm Harvey Kirk for Lloyd Robertson and for CTV News. Good night.
So there you go. That was your 15 seconds.
That was the 15 seconds. Now, there's an interesting story about what CBC did that very day. CBC was there. They had 2 cameras. CTV was there. They had 2 cameras. And Global was there. They didn't get anything on that day because they came late. But the cameramen that did the stock footage and all of the shots of this for CBC wrote on the back of the tape, propane car. So it ended up on an editor's desk in the busiest news day in 116 years, and he said, propane car, bang, and off it went into file 13. And in fact, it was, you know, a hydrogen car, and I got access to the tape. And as in another report we have part of later, CBC used a year later.
A year later?
A year later. A year almost to the day later.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's just an oversight. If someone had written hydrogen car on the back of the tape, then we would have got the big exposure. A week later, we drove to Montreal, of course, and saw some officials in the Quebec government and got on the Montreal news networks. And then we drove to Queen's Park.
Yeah,
and Mike Harris, who's been really good to us, really supported us since, you know, day one. And when everybody was scratching their head, wondering what was going on, Mike Harris was there pushing for us and has since the beginning. He got us a permit to set the hydrogen car up in Queen's Park. And he himself called another press conference for us, and Bob Welch came out and drove the car and made some interesting comments. He said that it was a very exciting experiment indeed. But you have to understand the nature of politics, and as a matter of fact, when Lalonde came out for the press conference, it was a New Democrat NDP, Simon DeYoung, who's the science and technology critic for the NDP, who went into the House of Commons and got him, House of Commons, and he told him, look, there's 200 cameramen, or, you know, 20 cameramen out front and a hydrogen car. And all of a sudden, Lalonde knew all about it. And that's the next piece we have, is what Lalonde says. Now, what Lalonde says on television and what he does are 2 different things.
Okay, let's go. Are we ready to have a look at that? Okay, let's go on that. Let's see Andre doing his thing here. So this will be Lalonde, will it?
This is Mark.
Oh, Mark, okay.
Mark, yes. And Andre is his brother-in-law.
Okay.
There's no doubt about it. The acceleration is good, and you don't see the difference, frankly, from a car that is gasoline fueled. It seems quite good, and it's maybe a little bit slower on acceleration, I'm told, but you don't notice the difference, frankly. It would be good for racers would know the difference, I suppose, but quite interesting, and certainly, so far as they will be able to produce it on a competitive basis with oil, that's the type of thing we want to encourage and support. So I think well, my department is working closely with them, and I hope we'll see projects of this nature really taking off the ground.
Now, was that a lot of BS or what?
Well, you heard what he said. He said
you're working close.
He said, my department is working very closely with them.
How close were they working with you?
I spoke to someone from the Ministry of Energy in Nuvik, something like that. No, I'm not being quite fair, but no. But what did he say? He said that my department is working very closely with them, and assuming they can make it on a competitive basis with oil, that is the kind of thing we're going to encourage and support.
Can you?
And we can. And we don't need 92 cents on every dollar like Dome does, you know, and the boys on offshore. And indeed, the Canadian petroleum industry is, whether it's the foreign companies or Canadian companies, are subsidized by the federal government today. Yeah. And we didn't ask for any subsidies. And we can still make it on a competitive basis with oil, but it isn't going to happen.
Right. I know it's not going to happen. And we're going to come back and find out why it's not going to happen when we return with our guest, Greg Vezina, in just a moment.
We're back on Nipissing PM. Joining us right now is Greg Vezina. And Greg, you've been traveling all over the place. You've been running back and forth, and we're lucky that you made it today. I guess we owe you a small apology because on one of our promos we announced your company as the wrong name. What exactly is the name of the company?
It's called Canadian Alternative Energy Corporation.
Okay, and what point are we now with your hydrogen car?
Well, for all intents and purposes, Joel, I think it's fairly safe to say that we're dead in Canada for obvious reasons. But the more things sort of grind to a halt in Canada, the faster things are excelling for third world applications. I just, as a matter of fact, as you mentioned, came back from a meeting in Ottawa late last night and ended up testing out the first snowstorm of the year on the highways. But I had a very good meeting with the people from CETA yesterday in Ottawa, and I think that our proposal will be made to them within the next 14 days, and the chances of it being accepted are exceptionally good. I think we'll be in business in the third world this year.
Great. Now, it's amazing that you say you're dead in Canada because you've got good response from politicians and people in places of power.
Yeah. The problem is, okay, there's the politics of oil, there's the world price of oil, the economics of oil, and the fact that a nation like Canada that has huge petroleum resources, it's hard to get them excited about trying something else. Really, what we wanted was a change in industrial policy, if you will, and for a small company such as ours to sort of reverse or redirect the thinking, economic and political thinking of the federal government, and indeed the provincial government, is quite difficult. You got to keep in mind, too, at the time, a year and a half ago, when we did the Trans-Canada Drive and drove the ammonia car from Edmonton to Ottawa, that the price of oil was $34 a barrel and going up. Indeed, the Ottawa-Alberta price agreement was signed predicting oil to be $65, $70 a barrel by 1986. That hasn't happened. No. So the excitement and the need to do this is not there. And what, to be quite frank, is going to happen is that I think the price of oil will come down a little bit, but I don't think it's going to stay down very long, because if you watch the news lately, it used to be that everybody would say, you know, bring down the price of oil and help out the economy and this and that and everything else. And now, if you're watching the news, they're talking about the price of oil dropping to $25 a barrel, and everybody's afraid of it. Why are we afraid of cheap gas? The reason is a number of these oil-producing nations in third world countries, such as Mexico, went on huge development projects based on oil being $34 a barrel and up. They're producing less oil, selling less oil because of energy conservation, and the fact is that they're not going to get that $34. So rather than saying bring down the price of oil, everything's great, we'll bring down the price of oil, and Mexico and Argentina and a few other countries will go into default.
Yeah, start to panic.
And the financial community collapses.
It's a big catch-22. Now, one thing that you have received is considerable attention, not only from our media here, but from national news media. We have some clips from the biggest networks in Canada. So let's roll the first one now.
Despite the vital concerns at the conference today, not everybody in Ottawa was considering the Constitution. Some people were looking at a car, but not just any car. The alternative to the gas guzzlers made it to Parliament Hill through its proponents, a group called the Canadian Alternate Energy Corporation. A curious energy minister, Mark Lalonde, showed up for a once-over. So did Governor General Edward Schreier. The car is powered by a formidable mixture of hydrogen and ammonia.
Okay, that was, of course, the CTV National News. Now, that was one of the many networks that covered your program. Have you had any contact with these networks, with the people that ran them?
I've spoke to various people in the news department and reporters and indeed researchers, as a matter of fact, with the CTV network. Everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen with the Hydrogen Institute from the province of Ontario. And I believe that the province agreed last night to start funding it. It was recommended by the all-party report in the House of Commons on alternative energy that the federal government spend $1 billion in the next 5 years introducing the hydrogen infrastructure, which would allow us to sell all of our oil, because we wouldn't need the oil to run our own cars, and we wouldn't have to sell it in Canada, sort of corporate welfare, if you will, in the province of Alberta, selling subsidized oil to the rest of Canada. They could sell that oil at world price, which would generate hard currency, which would give us, for Canada, which would increase our balance of payments, which would make the Canadian dollar stronger, and sort of on and on.
I think a lot of people don't realize either a lot of oil-related products that oil can be used for other than running cars.
Yes, absolutely. The province of Alberta, the one smart thing that Peter Lougheed, well, there's lots of things that he did, but the one smart thing he did, the policy decision with respect to oil, was he said, look, in the last 10 years, we've depleted our proven reserves by 50% at half the world price. And we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to build an infrastructure for a petrochemical industry. Because if you ship the oil out of the province, the federal government gets their fingers on it through tax revenue. If you turn that oil into plastic or petrochemicals or solvents or anything else, the federal government doesn't get its fingers on it anymore because it's not oil anymore. And that's what they did. And indeed, the production of ammonia in Alberta has been, the total capacity is almost being doubled right now because that's natural gas. And instead of exporting it and having export tax, they turn it into ammonia and export it that way, and there's no export tax.
Well, are we ready for our next clip there, Paul? Not quite yet. The next clip, however, if we can give a little background information on it.
Yeah, this is stock footage that was taken Constitution Day. That first sort of 15 seconds we got on CTV was Constitution Day. We'd driven across Canada and rescheduled the trip about
Where
three
did you
times.
start from?
We started at Edmonton. And we had to reschedule 3 times because Pierre kept rescheduling the Constitution arrangement. So we got to Ottawa the day they settled, you know, the busiest news day in about 116 years. So CBC took all of that stock footage and somebody wrote on the back of the tape, propane car, and some editor said, propane car, this isn't news today, and threw it in the corner. But in fact, it was news, and they indeed used it later. But that's the stock footage and exactly what Lalonde said.
And here it is right now. Okay, this is you.
Yeah, this is meeting Lalonde. Governor General Ed Schreier is there, and we're just shaking hands. Schreier says...
they all have smiles on their face,
yeah,
Greg.
yeah. Schreier says, vous avez the solution de votre problem. He tells Lalonde that I have the solution to your problem, and Lalonde's taking off in the car now.
Oh, you let him drive?
Oh, yeah, he drove the car, and he was like a kid in a candy store. He stomped it, you know, and it worked, and he was kind of amazed that it worked.
And it's a typical car. I mean, there's
1981 Chevy Impala. It's the same as an ordinary car except for the fuel system. And then he pulls back in here and gets out of the car and starts to sort of tell everybody.
The acceleration is good, and you don't see the difference, frankly, from a car that is gasoline fueled. Seems quite good, and it's maybe a little bit slower on acceleration, I'm told, but you don't notice the difference, frankly. It would be good for racers would know the difference, I suppose, but quite interesting, and certainly, so far as they will be able to produce it on a competitive basis with oil, that's the type of thing we want to encourage and support. So I think my department is working closely with them, and I hope we'll see projects of this nature really taking off the ground.
Well, he liked it, Greg, and it seems like you might be getting a little frustrated because all these people, the scientists and the politicians, are saying, very good, young man, you're doing a great job, but nothing ever happens.
Well, it's a good idea, except you're 10 years too early for us, which isn't quite true. We're, in fact, not too early. But again, we're talking about a huge change. And of course, Mr. Lalonde, as Minister of Energy, had some particular problems at the time, the Alberta situation and offshore. But see, the one thing you have to understand when you're looking at alternative energies, if you let alternative energies and those technologies compete by the same rules that the oil industry competes in, the same rules of the game, then the oil industry is in trouble. And I can explain it by explaining it this way. Conventional, the best fuel in the world is gasoline. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Gasoline is a depleting resource, okay? Conventional gasoline, or conventional oil production, drilled a hole in the ground, up comes the oil, is economical compared to what we're trying to do. It's right on the line.
And
they're
it's
competitive.
tried and true method.
Yeah, but so is the production of ammonia. It's nothing new. It's been done for 75 years. But when you start looking at frontier oil production or offshore oil production or all sands oil production, then the rules of the game change. Indeed, in the frontier, 92 cents out of every dollar that's spent on frontier oil exploration is the taxpayers' money. through grants and subsidies. 92 cents. Now, if you were to say to me, because I'm not getting petroleum, you'll give me the same subsidy, then I'd sell my fuel for 16 cents a gallon, and the oil industry wouldn't last 5 years. Okay, but the rules
would you still be making a profit for yourself?
Oh my God, yes, of course, almost obscene profits, because 92 cents out of every dollar of my capital cost would be the taxpayers. The chairman of Suncor made a quote the other day. He was quoted in the Nugget, as a matter of fact, in a speech he made recently, and he went through a bit of a saying, but the bottom line of his speech was the greatest, the most expanding industry in Canada today, the industry in Canada with the most growth of any industry in the country, is the industry of applying for government grants. Okay? And that's my point. If you don't give them 92 cents out of every dollar, I don't need 92 cents because they have to get $70 a barrel for that oil. So it won't be economic. It'll be a straight business decision. However, if you're going to subsidize them and you're not going to subsidize the new technologies, then what's the sense of going on the national, Mr. Lalonde, and telling everybody that your department is working very closely and assuming we can make it on a competitive basis with oil? That's the kind of thing we're going to encourage and support. That's what he says on television, but that isn't what he means.
Okay, let's watch a couple more clips now from two of the other networks, national networks, of course, and we'll come back and chat a little more.
I've been saying for years now that hydrogen power is the answer to the problem of oil supplies. The Davis government has needed little convincing, particularly since Ontario has an abundance of water and electricity, the two factors needed to capitalize on hydrogen. At Queen's Park today, a young entrepreneur showed up to demonstrate his conviction that hydrogen is the fuel of the future. Gordon Donaldson reports.
Greg Vezina, a 24-year-old go-getter originally from North Bay, hit Toronto today with his ammonia-powered Chevy, which he'd driven from Edmonton to prove that hydrogen-based fuel works just as well as gasoline.
Right now, we're competitive with gasoline. The conversion is $1,200, and we're on a cost-per-mile basis with gasoline. Within 5 years, due to the fact that oil and fossil fuels is going to double, we'll be less than half the price of gasoline by 1986. The fuel comes up from the line in the back here to the lock-off valves. As you can see, it's at about 75 psi right now. From here, it goes to the vaporizer regulator here where it's vaporized, and it becomes a vapor at less than 1 psi, flows here to the gaseous carburetor where it's mixed and burned in air.
Vezina is setting up shop in Toronto where his firm hopes to convert 46,000 cars and small trucks to ammonia in the next 5 years. Ontario Energy Minister Robert Welsh, who's been looking at alternate fuels, including hydrogen power, took a drive in the ammonia car and made some encouraging remarks.
The main point to keep in mind, the policy background against which we're considering all these things is that as part of our commitment to the national goal of crude oil self-sufficiency, in making some inroads in this transportation area, which consumes, as I've already mentioned, 50% of the oil we use in this jurisdiction. So we got to get off gas and diesel into other fuels, and this is a very exciting experiment indeed.
To get here from Edmonton, the car had to be accompanied by its own ammonia tanker because ammonia filling stations are not very common in Canada. However, Greg Vezina hopes they will be in the near future. Gordon Donaldson, Global News at Queen's Park.
On the National. This is Terry Malevsky with a special report on hydrogen. Some new ideas could turn the fuel of the future into the fuel of the present.
Well, that's part of the CBC. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for that, but as you see, you've had coverage from all three national networks. We're running a little low on time, Greg. What's next for your company? Do you have a specific country in Latin America that you're pointing to?
We're looking at, there's one problem, there's a couple of problems with going to the third world. They don't have the industrial infrastructure in a lot of cases that you have here. But that's a disadvantage in the short term, but a very good advantage in the long term. And I can explain it this way, because you have the ability to put the ammonia infrastructure within your industrial infrastructure. And an idea is like this. In Canada today, in Western Canada where they make ammonia, they use natural gas and they liquefy air to give them nitrogen, and they vent the oxygen. Mm-hmm. Okay. In Ontario, at the steel plants, they liquefy air, they use the oxygen, and they vent the nitrogen. If the two plants were beside each other, you'd have free ammonia. And indeed, the United States, they don't waste that nitrogen and oxygen. The U.S. Steel makes ammonia from their waste product.
So that kind of corporate planning in a third world country where you build a system from the ground up means that they'll indeed have, they already have a labor advantage in labor costs right now with us today. In some cases they have a resource advantage, and in the future they'll have an energy advantage, and then the Canadian industrial base is going to be in trouble.
So that's what you'll be doing, going down there acting as
Third world.
Best of luck to you, Greg.
Thanks
That's
very much,
all I can
Joe.
say, and hopefully you'll give us an update as your company grows, as I know it will.
In the universe is present in ordinary water. It is an ideal fuel because it burns clean. The flame of pure hydrogen is invisible because there is no carbon, sulfur, or other additives, which become pollutants when they are burned. When an electric current is passed through water, its molecules are broken down into their gaseous elements, oxygen and hydrogen. This process, electrolysis, has been used for many years to produce hydrogen gas. As an alternative to fossil fuel, it has had serious drawbacks. Until now, it has been very expensive to produce because of the cost of the electricity needed, and impractical for vehicles because of the much larger gas tank required. Now, both these drawbacks have been overcome. New solar technology has greatly reduced the cost of producing the electricity needed, and hydrogen gas has been successfully converted to a safe, compact, liquid fuel. This car, with only slight modifications, is burning non-polluting hydrogen fuel at about half the price of gasoline. On 2 transcontinental trips, the hydrogen car's performance and mileage were comparable with a gasoline-powered automobile. Pollution tests in Albuquerque found no traces of carbon monoxide or hydrocarbons. The innovations leading to this revolutionary breakthrough are the result of 5 years of work by a team of scientists and environmentally concerned professionals and business people. As a result of a 1974 U.S. Senate solar energy project headed by Dr. Gerald Schafflander, it was found that laboratory breakthroughs have made it possible to construct photovoltaic solar cells for the production of inexpensive electricity, and to use that electricity to produce hydrogen fuel. Political roadblocks led them to form a private company, Consumers Solar Electric Power Corporation, CSEP, as a means to bring about these new technologies. Photovoltaic solar cells have been used by man for many years in space and here on Earth. They have previously been very costly because they were made and assembled by hand. For the first time, CSEP is manufacturing and assembling photovoltaic solar cells by an automated mass production process. Dr. Gerald Schafflander.
What we have done is that we have automated the photovoltaic solar cell, which took the astronauts to the moon. By doing that, we have very inexpensive electricity.
This electricity provides power to a unique electrolysis unit. Water is then used to produce hydrogen by electrolysis.
Through an inexpensive process of electrolysis, with a hydrogen cell that only can make ultra-dry and ultra-pure hydrogen, we're able to make inexpensive hydrogen. If you make hydrogen, you have a fuel for 24 hours. You don't just depend upon the sun, and when the sun goes down, not have any source of energy.
In perhaps their most unique achievement of all, CSEP has developed a proprietary catalytic process whereby the hydrogen gas is combined with other readily available elements to produce a safe, liquid hydride fuel. In order to solve the problem of inexpensively adapting an automobile to burn this revolutionary new fuel, Stephen Wright has coordinated scientists, technicians, mechanics, information, and vendors. He describes a 3 to 4 hour process.
This is a car that's been fueled by our liquid high fuel, which is a hydrogen-based derivative. Let's assume you wanted to convert your car to run on this fuel. First of all, you'll change your gasoline fuel tank for our liquid hydride high fuel tank. The basic difference between the two is that the high fuel tank has a closed fill port, and attached to the tank is our hydride cracker, or a catalytic converter. Basically what happens is the liquid hydride fuel in the tank passes through the cracker and turns back into hydrogen gas. That hydrogen then comes up to the front of the car through these fuel lines here, passes through these lock-off valves here, and then down into the regulator beneath it. The gas then passes through this black hose here and into the carburetor of the car. We pull off all the pollution equipment, including the smog box, the smog pump, and the catalytic converter, and we add a water injection unit here. Adding water to the carburetor reduces the burning speed of hydrogen, thereby eliminating backfiring. And secondly, the water reduces the burning temperature of the engine. Hydrogen already is a lower temperature burning fuel than gasoline. With the water injection and the low temperature hydrogen fuel, you get about 1/10 the nitrous oxide emissions as compared to a gasoline fueled car. Therefore, the only emissions you do get with a hydrogen fueled car are, number one, your steam, of course, and number two, nitrous oxide.
The company has chosen to enter the automotive fuel market as their initial means toward achieving a cash flow.
The hydrogen car running on our high fuel gets approximately the same horsepower, the same mileage, same range per tank full as a gasoline-fueled car.
Once production is expanded, they see hydrogen fueling conventional power plants inexpensively and providing electricity to the country through the existing power grid. The Federal Power Commission estimates the cost per kilowatt for a fossil-fueled or nuclear-fueled plant is $1,220 and $1,480 respectively. Solar hydrogen will cost $440 per kilowatt, according to CSEP projections. An influx of new information, ideas, and research have led to new breakthroughs. Automated new solar cells made from gallium aluminum arsenide are approaching an unprecedented 30% peak efficiency. They are minuscule in size and cost compared to silicon solar cells.
Heading our Western scientific team are two brilliant and widely known solid-state physicists, Dr. Herbert Monterey and Henry Heller, who have created a unique parabolic concentration system. Dr. Monterey?
In this plant, we are producing the 3,5 compound solar cells, specifically gallium aluminum arsenide, gallium arsenide heterojunctions. The metallurgical processes are twofold. One is a vertical gradient freeze method, and the other method is a horizontal sliding method. The interesting effect here is that the gallium aluminum arsenide heterojunction delivers superlinear increase of power with concentration, while in the case of silicon, we have only a linear increase. They work at a higher temperature, and we are able, in concentrators, to maintain maybe 20 to 30% efficiency with these cells.
Henry Heller.
This 20 square foot parabolic cylinder is receiving approximately 2 kilowatts of radiant solar energy and focusing them on gallium aluminum arsenide solar cells. At 25% efficiency, these cells are producing approximately 1/2 kilowatt. The remainder of the energy is being concentrated on this black pipe containing a cooling liquid. The liquid is boiling, generating vapors. The vapors are turning a turbine, an electric generator. The turboelectric generator also produces approximately 25% efficient conversion, so that the cogeneration of this system should be of the order of 50% or 1 kilowatt.
The company is also developing 2 new hydrogen cells, one which converts salt water into hydrogen, and a unique chlorine hydrogen cell, which produces chlorine gas in addition to hydrogen. At their desert hydrogen farm, in 125-degree heat, Consumer Solar Electric Power Corporation is demonstrating their technology.
From our corporate charter, our primary objective is to supply a hydrogen-based liquid hydride for use as automobile fuel to supplement the available supply of fuel domestically and for such other purposes for which it is appropriate and applicable in transportation and electric power generation. We feel that we can help bridge the energy gap as well as help clean up the environment
The implications of the expanded use of solar hydrogen are enormous. Fueling our vehicles, generating low-cost electricity while contributing to a clean environment, providing dependable power around the clock, long after the sun has gone down.
Good evening and welcome to That's Incredible. What if I told you that I had an endless supply of fuel? That you could fill your gas tank for half the price, and that you could breathe your car's exhaust?
I'd say that's incredible.
Well, there's a man who claims it's possible, and he thinks that he can prove it. This building in Southern California is the headquarters of a company with an inventive new solution for our energy needs of the future.
I'm Gerald Schafflander, and I'm the chairman of the board of Consumer Solar Electric Power Corporation. I was not happy with the huge concentration of the oil energy companies. We decided that there had to be an alternative to the madness that was going on with nuclear and fossil fuel, that the ability to automate solar cells and make an inexpensive form of electricity would open up the hydrogen age, because with cheap electricity, one could make cheap hydrogen. The cost of nuclear or fossil fuel electricity is very high, and therefore the cost of hydrogen was very high. There's nothing new about hydrogen, but the cost was prohibitive. Hydrogen is a 24-hour alternative for fossil fuel and nuclear power.
Stephen Wright, president of the corporation, explains the new technology.
What we have now is the source of all energy in the world, the sun. Photons from the sun striking the backside of this parabola where the reflector is, then reflecting back up onto the solar cells that we've developed, which are really the heart of our whole process. In fact, it is the solar cells, low cost, that give us the very inexpensive electricity that then comes off this parabolic concentrator. So what you have then is sunlight making electricity, electricity going into a hydrogen cell, making hydrogen, hydrogen going into a hydride synthesizer, making a liquid hydride, a fuel, the fuel being cracked on board your vehicle, and then going into an engine and driving any engine, whether it's a car, a train, or a truck, or a plane.
We can convert any car in roughly 3 to 4 hours, any car. We converted the Chevrolet Caprice, so our claims are low-cost electricity and ability to make a high fuel that can be carried in an automobile just like gasoline, that has comparable range, that has comparable power, that is safer by far than gasoline, and is inexhaustible as well as non-polluting. Everything winds up as hydrogen, including gasoline, when it gets into the carburetor or engine. What we do is we have this liquid form of hydride, which cracks back into a hydrogen gas and goes through the engine just like hydrogen goes through after gasoline cracks. The difference is the air emissions are remarkably different. There is no carbon monoxide and no carbon dioxide. There's a minute tracing of nitrogen oxide, which is known as laughing gas, so that I guess water, flowers, green grass, and a few laughs and chuckles along the way is the worst that one can anticipate.
High fuel stations do not yet exist. We have dramatized what they might look like.
People are out there. There's no problem about shipping the stuff the same way as it's shipped by trailer tank or by a boat or by railroad. There's no problem in the storage or distribution. There are no technical problems that we haven't worked out.
Remember, this station does not exist, but it can in the very near future.
Your essential performance characteristics, your horsepower, your pickup, your miles per tank full or miles per gallon, are all approximately that of gasoline. A little bit less, in fact, but not noticeably so. The conversion system here will cost, depending upon the size of the car, from $175 to $375 per vehicle, whether it's a 4-cylinder or a full-size 8-cylinder.
This is a dramatization of what a conversion station might look like. The prices stated are theoretical.
The time of conversion, let's say you dropped your car off in the morning on your way into work, you could pick it up a few hours later after lunch. The conversion takes 3 to 4 hours to do completely. The conversions will take place at the same spot, the same station, where you buy your high fuel.
High fuel is infinitely safer in that it becomes, with the added elements, far safer and less flammable. What you see now from one of our lawyers' houses in the Hollywood Hills is yellow yuck and filth. What you'll see when high fuel is dominant coming out of the exhaust pipe is clarity, cleanliness, in health. And that's also what we're about. Hydrogen is an absolute safe alternative. We can, in a period of 90 to 120 days, if this country wants it, convert every nuclear plant to run on hydrogen, without question. Well, we're bringing a Jeep to Washington, and we think that the Jeep should be taken on dynamometers, and it should be run around Washington. Nothing is going to stop me from doing what I want to do. Nobody's going to deter me, and we're going to see this job through. Because if we have what we say we have, this whole world is going to turn upside down.
If Gerald Schafflander is right, he could revolutionize the energy situation in this country.
But in all fairness, we had to find another opinion.
Dr. John Bokrus is a professor of chemistry at Texas A&M and one of the world's leading authorities on solar hydrogen. Dr. Bokrus, we understand you've been down to the plant and actually seen the car. Will this really work?
Yes, I think so. It may not be ready to work immediately, but I think that the actual physical chemistry and physics of the thing and the metallurgy is completely sound. That doesn't mean that it's ready to work tomorrow. It needs development. But the principles are all right.
Is this really as good as it sounds?
A fairly vague statement. How good does it sound? I can say this, that it would provide, if satisfactorily engineered, a liquid which would go into a car and the products of which would drive the car, and which would be extremely clean. Those statements I can make. Now, I would like to take up the point, which would obviously be one of your questions, but has it been done? And the question is, not completely. I don't think that consumer solar electric products could put this liquid in a car and sail away tomorrow on a mass production basis. That is probably what hasn't been done. Nor do I think that it's exactly state-of-the-art in respect to economics now. But then suppose the best happened. Suppose this all went into mass production. My goodness, when would that be ready? 5 years from now? 8 years from now? You can't possibly change the country so vastly over in less than quite a few years.
How long will it be before we can all use high fuel?
I think these are the first people who've taken it all seriously. They've actually got solar energy devices making the fuel. They certainly don't make more at the moment than for 2 or 3 cars to run on, but that's just a matter of extension. Now, this outfit is a small outfit, contains perhaps 2 or 3 dozen people at a guess. Having been there, I haven't actually counted them, but this is my impression. They have a few dozen people working there, and not all of them are scientists. Not all of them are scientists. They have to use sometimes technicians, which is good to some extent, but which isn't the best for another. And what they really need is backup money. But the really important thing that I can be a witness to is that the basic physics and chemistry which they're using is feasible and is reasonable. And I think it's the best idea I know for running a car on solar energy. That I can say. I've seen it. I know what it is. Is it world superior? Is it better than anything else that everyone's produced? I can't guarantee it's better than anything anyone has ever produced.
How really free of pollution is hydrogen fuel?
Once the thing is in action, absolutely zero pollution. And there's nothing you can say that says absolutely zero except hydrogen. See, any person can think this out. Water, H2O, most people know that. In comes the electricity, H2, hydrogen is produced, O2 vented to the atmosphere. The hydrogen itself is then burned. What results? Good old H2O again, the one we started with. So you let that out into the atmosphere, it's steam, goes off, forms clouds, evaporates, wets the streets, if you will, like rain, and the whole cycle, the natural cycle that we've been having for billions of years, goes on again, water back to water. There's no pollution in that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bokrus. And Gerald Schafflander, keep up the good work.